Sophisticated naval forces bombed Nord Stream, Danish Navy veteran. The perpetrator had access to advanced underwater drones, a former diver told Bloomberg. Whoever sabotaged the Nord Stream pipelines likely had access to fast-moving underwater drones, one of Denmark's most experienced Navy divers told Bloomberg on Thursday. NATO forces trained with these unmanned underwater vehicles near the blast site prior to the explosions. The diver said that finding the pipelines without precise coordinates or tracking technology, then transporting and placing the explosives, would have challenged diver saboteurs, in the newspaper's words. The diver estimates the operation, including a safe ascent, would have taken an individual diver several hours. He surmises that whoever carried out the attack had access to a fast-moving autonomous submersible vehicle, like the ones employed by sophisticated naval forces, the report continued, adding that a surface vessel remaining relatively static for hours would have attracted unwanted attention. The Danish Navy described the diver's hypothesis as sound, while the country's intelligence agency, Defense Ministry, and Foreign Affairs Ministry offered no comment. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, which were built to deliver Russian natural gas directly to Germany, lost pressure abruptly on September 26, following a series of underwater explosions off the Danish island of Bornholm, within the economic zones of Denmark and Sweden. Denmark is one of 5 countries independently investigating the incidents but has not shared any conclusions. The diver's hypothesis seems to disprove the theory, promulgated by US and German spies in the New York Times and Washington Post, that a pro-Ukrainian group used a rented yacht to ferry explosives to the blast site. The intelligence officials quoted by both newspapers made no mention of the supposed group having at their disposal underwater drones. NATO militaries do, however, have access to these unmanned subs. During last June's Baltops exercises, the U.S. Navy's 6th Fleet trained with underwater mine-hunting drones for 10 days off the coast of Bornholm, according to a NATO statement. The Ukrainian government has also received 6 of these drones from the UK, and although the 6th Fleet trained Kiev's forces in operating them, no evidence has emerged placing Ukrainian operators near Bornholm last summer. According to a report by American journalist Seymour Hersh, U.S. Navy divers used the Baltops drills as cover to plant the explosives, aided by their Norwegian counterparts. Citing a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning, Hersh said that the sabotage mission was planned by the CIA under the direct orders of President Joe Biden. Multiple U.S. officials have denied Hersh's version of events, and a former CIA operative told Bloomberg that, in his opinion, someone involved in the planning would have stepped in and said, "This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard." However, Hersh wrote that this exact scenario happened, with State Department and CIA officials deeming the plan stupid, but the skeptics were overruled and the pipelines destroyed with explosives triggered remotely 3 months after they were planted. Russian President Vladimir Putin said last month that he fully agrees with Hersh's conclusions, blaming the sabotage on U.S. intelligence. The Kremlin has dismissed the pro-Ukrainian group theory, calling it a coordinated media hoax campaign. Vučić, Washington buys up to 1/3 of Serbia's arms that may end up in Ukraine. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić said on Thursday that Washington purchases between 1/4 and 1/3 of Serbia's defense industry products that may end up in Ukraine. U.S. media reported in mid-April, citing the leaked Pentagon documents, that the Serbian authorities had already sent weapons to Ukraine and were ready to transfer more. Later, in a conversation with Sputnik, Serbian Defense Minister Milos Vučević called such reports untrue. Vučić said on April 13 that Serbia has not and will not supply Ukraine with weapons and ammunition, adding that Belgrade exports defense products to authorized end users only. "We produce ammunition, we sell it when Spain, for example, asks for it. And what are we supposed to do? We sell. Could it end up in Ukraine? It could. Do we know that it could end up there? We know, but what choice do we have?" Vučić said in a televised appearance on Serbian broadcaster TV Prva. "Should we violate long-term contracts with America, which purchases a 1/3, 1/4 of the ammunition? What are you people talking about? What do you even want, to close the plant?" The president noted the Serbian army will be purchasing all weapons and ammunition produced in Serbia within the next 3 years so that no one can tell us that our weapons are going there to the conflict area. Vučić also said that the West is urging Belgrade to join NATO, posing Russia as a threat, but the alliance itself is a threat to Serbia. They tell us to join NATO because Russia will endanger everyone. We cannot join NATO because NATO has posed a threat to us, the president said. Belgrade has repeatedly denied information about Serbia selling arms to Kiev while stressing its commitment to military neutrality. Belgrade strictly adheres to the observance of domestic and international legal acts and also avoids the supply of weapons to any state if an outbreak or continuation of an armed conflict is possible there and a threat to peace and security is created. The Serbian Foreign Ministry said on April 12, adding that the re-export of the Serbian weapons without the permission of Belgrade was banned. Yemen's Houthis released 77 pro-gov't detainees, TV. Yemen's Houthi group released 77 pro-government detainees on Thursday, according to the Houthi-run Al-Masirah TV. Abdul Qadir al-Murtada, head of the Houthi prisoner committee, was quoted by the television as saying that they included dozens of patients and elderly individuals. He added that the move was made in goodwill towards efforts for a future prisoner swap with the government. Last week, the Yemeni government and the Houthis exchanged about 900 prisoners as part of an unbrokered deal reached by the warring sides in March. Yemen has been embroiled in a deadly civil war since late 2014, when the Iran-backed Houthi group seized control of several northern cities and forced the Saudi-backed Yemeni government out of the capital, Sana'a. The prisoner swap comes as part of ongoing efforts aimed at building trust between the Yemeni government and the Houthi militia. While it is also widely regarded as a vital milestone in preparing a favorable environment and showcasing mutual commitment from both parties to actively participate in forthcoming peace negotiations with the ultimate aim of achieving permanent peace, the war has resulted in tens of thousands of casualties and the imprisonment of thousands more. NATO member questions Stoltenberg's stance on Ukraine. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán appeared to be baffled by a pledge made to Kiev by the bloc's Secretary-General. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has cast doubt on NATO's purportedly universal support for accepting Ukraine into the US-led bloc. Orbán took to Twitter on Friday to share an article by Politico on NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg's visit to Kiev, where he proclaimed Ukraine had a rightful place within the bloc. Commenting on the article, Orbán simply wrote, "What?" Stoltenberg made a surprise appearance in Kiev on Thursday, in a first visit to the country since the beginning of hostilities between Russia and Ukraine in February 2022. During a joint press conference with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, Stoltenberg praised the continuous military aid flowing from NATO member states to Ukraine. He also insisted a multi-year support initiative for Kiev was testament to NATO's long-term commitment to the country. Allies are now delivering more jets, tanks, and armored vehicles, and NATO's Ukraine Fund is providing urgent support. All of this is making a real difference on the battlefield today, Stoltenberg asserted. He further claimed that Kiev has a rightful place within the bloc. Ukraine's rightful place is in the Euro-Atlantic family. Ukraine's rightful place is in NATO. And over time, our support will help to make this possible. However, the Secretary-General failed to provide a specific time frame for Ukraine's potential accession into the alliance. Zelensky, for his part, urged Stoltenberg to overcome the reluctance of some NATO members to supply long-range rockets and modern fighter jets to Ukraine. Hungary has repeatedly said it will not support Ukraine's applications to either NATO or the EU. Budapest has refrained from providing military aid to Kiev, as well as refusing to allow such shipments to travel through its territory and onto Ukraine. Budapest and Kiev have long been at odds over the latter's attitude towards the ethnic Hungarian minority in Ukraine. Some 150,000 ethnic Hungarians live in modern Ukraine, primarily in the Transcarpathian region. Kiev's efforts to crack down on Russian speakers following the 2014 Maidan coup have affected other minorities as well, including Hungarians. Kiev, meanwhile, has repeatedly accused Budapest of meddling in its internal affairs, particularly by granting citizenship to Ukraine's ethnic Hungarians. Florida University students protest potential bans to curriculum. Many Florida students and faculty members are sounding alarms against a new bill that would ban several academic disciplines, including critical race theory and queer theory, from state university curriculum, as well as eliminate most programs that support such discussions. Sudan's paramilitary RSF agrees to 72-hour ceasefire on humanitarian grounds. Sudan's paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, said it had agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire on humanitarian grounds starting 6 a.m. local time, 4 o'clock GMT, on Friday. On Thursday, U.S. State Secretary Antony Blinken spoke with Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the commander of the Sudanese military, and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, the commander of the RSF, and urged the parties to the conflict in Sudan to uphold a nationwide ceasefire until the end of Islamic holiday Eid al-Fitr on April 23. The truce coincides with the blessed Eid al-Fitr, to open humanitarian corridors to evacuate citizens and give them the opportunity to greet their families, the RSF said in a statement, as quoted by U.S. media. Sudan's military says no diplomatic solution to situation with Rapid Support Forces. Earlier, Sudan's military spokesman Gen Brigadier Nabil Abdullah told Sputnik that the nation's armed forces did not see an option for a potential diplomatic solution to the ongoing conflict with the RSF. The armed forces have constantly stated that the RSF are a rebellious force operating outside the law and committing atrocities that cannot be overlooked, Abdullah said. They started fighting and were preparing for it from the very beginning. We were forced to resolve the issue by military means and announced that this would stop the shooting. The spokesperson further relayed that the Libyan scenario would not unfold so long as the Sudanese military remains a factor. Clashes between the Sudanese Regular Army and the RSF broke out on Saturday in Sudan's capital of Khartoum and elsewhere in the country. Government forces accused the RSF of mutiny and launched airstrikes against their bases. Later, Abdel Fattah Burhan, the head of the Sudanese military, issued a decree disbanding the RSF. All NATO allies agree Ukraine will become a NATO member, Stoltenberg. North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said Friday that all NATO allies have agreed that Ukraine will eventually become a member state, but the main focus now is to ensure the country prevails against Russia. Stoltenberg made the remarks to reporters ahead of a meeting with the Ukraine Defense Contact Group at the Ramstein Air Base in Germany. He noted that Kiev must have the deterrence to prevent new attacks once the conflict ends. Russia said on Thursday that preventing Ukraine from joining the Transatlantic Alliance remains one of the main goals of its special military operation. Otherwise it would pose a serious, significant threat to the security of our country, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said. British Deputy PM resigns over bullying scandal. An inquiry failed to fully clear Dominic Raab of wrongdoing. British Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab has resigned amid a scandal over alleged bullying in the Ministry of Justice, which he headed as Secretary, and in other departments of the government. The Tory MP submitted his resignation letter to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak on Friday. In explaining the decision, he cited an investigation into the matter by leading employment barrister Adam Tolley and a previous pledge to leave should the inquiry make any finding of bullying whatsoever. Raab noted that the inquiry dismissed all but 2 complaints about him personally. The Tory heavyweight was accused of belittling staff, driving some to tears or causing them to vomit before meetings, according to media reports. He denied any wrongdoing. The findings by Tolley were flawed and set a dangerous precedent for the operation of the government by placing the threshold for bullying too low, Raab argued in his letter. Ministers must be able to exercise direct oversight with respect to senior officials over critical negotiations conducted on behalf of the British people, he wrote. They must also be able to give direct critical feedback on briefings and submissions to senior officials, in order to set standards and drive the reform the public expects from us. Raab apologized for any unintended stress or offense his subordinates may have felt during interactions with him. Sunak will continue to have his support as the Prime Minister, he assured. Ukraine plotted to attack Russian troops in Syria using Kurdish separatists, leaked docs claim. The emergence of an alleged leaked Pentagon document that indicates Ukrainian military intelligence officers sought to employ a longtime U.S. proxy against Russian forces in Syria could have serious diplomatic consequences for various stakeholders in the war-torn Arab nation. The Kiev regime secretly plotted to use Kurdish fighters as a proxy force to carry out attacks on Russian troops in Syria, according to a leaked U.S. intelligence document allegedly obtained by the Washington Post. The document reportedly states that behind closed doors, officers of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry's Military Intelligence Service developed plans to train operatives of the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, to target Russian service members in Syria and conduct unspecified direct action activities along with UAV unmanned aerial vehicle attacks. As planning occurred last fall, the SDF sought training, air defense systems and a guarantee that its role would be kept secret in exchange for supporting Ukrainian operations, the outlet wrote. Noting that the leadership of the SDF also forbade strikes on Russian positions in Kurdish areas. As the establishment-friendly outlet explains, the idea was to plan deniable attacks that would avoid implicating the Ukrainian government itself. The scheme was reportedly nixed on the orders of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky last December. So far, the only faction to comment publicly on the alleged documents has been the SDF, which described the information they contained as not real, with a spokesperson for the group reportedly telling the American publication that our forces have never been a side in the Russian-Ukrainian war. The publication of the documents comes as the ongoing war in Syria approaches a potential turning point, as important Arab League members like Saudi Arabia and Qatar look to mend ties with the government in Damascus they've spent much of the last decade working to destabilize. In the wake of Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan's historic trip to meet with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad this week, disagreements between the Arab states appear to have taken a backseat to more pressing issues. And Turkey is effectively the only remaining holdout in Syria's neighborhood. Ankara has long cited the presence of the SDF, which it describes as an offshoot of the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, as the reason it remains an active belligerent in hostilities in Syria. The SDF has been criticized for operating as an American proxy force in Syria. Indeed, the U.S. frequently points to the need to protect the armed group from Daesh * when justifying its military occupation of Syrian territory, and the SDF now controls as much as 90% of Syria's oil with Washington's overt backing. But as recently as last December, the commander of the SDF said Moscow was effectively maintaining the peace between the group and Turkey, telling Asharq al-Azate that Russia is now standing in a neutral position between us and Turkey. However, if validated, the emergence of documents indicating the SDF was preparing to go on the offensive against the very Russian forces that helped protect it from a Turkish onslaught would likely have serious consequences for relations. Japan's core inflation unchanged at 3.1% in March. Japan's Consumer Price Index, CPI, which excludes volatile fresh food prices, rose 3.1% in March, matching last month's figure, according to the data released by the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications on Friday. The average core CPI in the fiscal year 2022 hit 3%, the highest level in 41 years, data showed on Friday. Staff warned Google about Bard AI dangers, media. The chatbot issues life-threatening advice, a survey of workers reveals. Thousands of Google employees tried to warn the company that its AI chatbot, Bard, is not just a pathological liar, but potentially a murderer, offering advice that could lead to death, Bloomberg reported on Wednesday. 18 current and former Google staff who spoke to the outlet added that the company did not listen. One employee claimed they informed Google management that Bard's tips on scuba diving would likely result in serious injury or death, while another said its description of how to land a plane would almost certainly result in a crash. A third employee, in a note that was seen by 7,000 Google users, described Bard as worse than useless, and begged the company not to launch it. Others called the AI cringeworthy. Ethics specialists were told to step down as the company rushed Bard to the market, the sources told Bloomberg. Meredith Whitaker, a former manager at the company, said, AI ethics has taken a backseat to profit and growth, and 2 other workers said ethics reviews are almost entirely optional. Products that previously had to clear a 99% threshold for metrics such as fairness now only had to measure up to 85%, or something in order to launch, AI governance head Jen Jene reportedly told employees. Earlier this month 2 whistleblowers revealed that they had tried to block Bard's release, warning the AI was prone to inaccurate and dangerous statements, only to have their concerns squashed as Jene recast the product launch as an experiment. Introduced as a competitor to OpenAI's blockbuster ChatGPT last month, Bard was supposed to be the leading edge of Google's transformation of its search business. When ChatGPT launched, Google did not have its own generative AI integrated into its products in a way that customers could actually use. The company allegedly panicked, issuing a code red and embracing risk, starting in December, the employees told Bloomberg. Google has denied demoting ethics. We are continuing to invest in the teams that work on applying our AI principles to our technology, spokesperson Brian Gabriel told Bloomberg. The company laid off 3 members of its responsible AI team in January, announcing plans to roll out more than 20 AI-powered products this year. Meanwhile, those remaining in the AI ethics team are now disempowered and demoralized, according to Bloomberg. Food bans and possible grain deal suspension to curb Ukraine's profits. Kiev's representatives in Istanbul are sabotaging the grain deal, leading to the share of poorer countries receiving Ukrainian food to be reduced to a minimum, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry. Meanwhile, Eastern and Central European states have banned Ukrainian food imports to shield domestic producers. Russia is facing a plethora of hurdles to implement the Black Sea Grain Initiative, according to Anatoly Tikhanov, head of Russia's Center for International Agribusiness and Food Security. First, there is a ban on mineral fertilizers, official and unofficial, Tikhanov told Sputnik. Second, there are problems with settlements. It was clearly requested that the Russian Agricultural Bank, which provides payments, should be connected to SWIFT. This had not been done. Third, our ships cannot enter ports and use the port culture of European countries. Fourth, there is a problem with freight. In fact, charterers have not received a strict ban on the transportation of agricultural products, but, nevertheless, it is impossible to charter ships. Because all ship owners are afraid of falling under secondary sanctions because there have been no clear signals from the European Commission and the United States. If a ship can be found, it is impossible to charter, insure, and even more so pay for it. Our achievements in grain exports in recent years are the colossal efforts of our exporters, agricultural producers, who manage to export a huge amount of grain. Ukraine and West don't comply with food security goals. The Joint Coordination Center, JCC, in Istanbul is experiencing difficulties registering new vessels and conducting inspections as a result of actions by Ukrainian representatives as well as UN officials who appear to be unwilling or unable to stand up to them. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova revealed on Wednesday. As a result of these actions, the share of recipients of Ukrainian food in poor countries has fallen to the lowest level. Out of 28.3 million tons of exported grain, those countries received only 742,000, or 2.6%. The owners of incoming ships who refused to pay a bribe are forced to wait for registration for many months, Zakharova said in an official statement on April 19, adding that the process for obtaining applications for registration under the Black Sea Initiative is in the hands of the Ukrainians, while the UN is in charge of the inspection plans. The Black Sea Grain Initiative was concluded between Moscow, Kiev, Ankara, and the UN amid the conflict in Ukraine in July 2022. The agreement provides for the exports of Ukrainian grain, food, and fertilizers over the Black Sea from 3 ports, including Odessa. The package agreement also includes a memorandum of understanding between Moscow and the UN to unblock Russian grain and fertilizer exports via the Black Sea. The agreement was struck to primarily deliver agricultural products to the countries of the Global South which are facing a food crisis. However, as it turned out, those in need received a minuscule part of Ukrainian food exports, while Europe got the lion's share of Ukrainian products. Around 45% of Ukrainian grain has gone to European countries and only 3% to Africa, Russian President Vladimir Putin revealed during the Second International Parliamentary Conference Russia-Africa held on March 20. Russia signaled on March 18 that it would extend the grain deal only for 60 days because of the lack of progress in the issue of the supply of Russian food and fertilizers to the world's market in accordance with the initiatives. Moscow noted that Russian shipping companies and banks continue to face sanctions and barriers slapped on them by Washington, Brussels, and London on almost all sectors of Russia's economy and hindering the country's food trade and transportation. Commenting on the latest instances of bribery and sabotage by Kiev representatives and the West's unwillingness to follow the provisions of the deal, Zakharova noted that the Ukrainians and Westerners no longer trouble themselves with either analyzing compliance with the Black Sea Initiative, not to mention the failure to act upon the Russia-UN memorandum, or making any attempts to comply with their own high-flown statements about global food security. Dissenting Sea countries ban Ukraine food. Meanwhile, Central and Eastern European Sea countries have raised alarm over Brussels' EU-Ukraine solidarity lanes which led to the accumulation of surplus grain in the bloc. Eventually, this policy backfired on their domestic producers. Hungarian grain producers lost between 23% and 37% of their income over the past year as food imports from Ukraine jumped from 60,000 tons to 2.5 million tons. Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia have repeatedly called on Brussels to transfer all surplus grain out of their states to Africa and the Middle East as was initially agreed under the EU-Ukraine Solidarity Lanes initiative. It was assumed that the products would be taken to the ports and sent further, said Tikhanov. But there is too much grain in Ukraine, colossal needs for replenishing its budget, and there are limits on the shelf life of grain, while they are still exporting last year's grain. Grain began to be quickly sold on the territory of transit countries due to its cheapness. Before the Russian special military operation, the European Union had a grain supply quota of 1.5 million tons per year, and here it is 1.5 million tons per month. The structure of agriculture is represented by producers of agricultural products, buyers of agricultural products, and processors. It is profitable for processors to take cheap raw materials, and their products become more competitive. Against the backdrop of unprecedented inflation and the fact that the population has begun to reduce food consumption, so that economic processes do not stop, processors and meat producers need cheap grain, cheap animal feed. Meanwhile, their national product remains unclaimed, uncompetitive if it is more expensive, Tikhanov continued. Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and Bulgaria have so far introduced a temporary ban on Ukrainian grain imports and other agricultural products transiting through their countries. Bulgaria announced the restrictions on Wednesday even though previously, the EU rejected food bans imposed by Warsaw, Budapest, and Bratislava. Earlier, on Tuesday, Romania signaled it was ready to follow suit. In general, the countries of Europe maintain different attitudes towards the démarche of Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania, said Tikhanov. Therefore, now we can only observe how the situation will develop, whether the European Commission will be able to quickly extinguish the fire and how exactly, because the EU does not have its own farmers. This is a bureaucratic structure. I think that this situation can play into Russia's hands, because if transit through these countries is banned, and Ukrainian grain, cheap, low quality, chemically impure, contaminated with pesticides, remains in Ukraine, then the demand for Russian grain may increase. And we Russia really need this now, because we also have an expectation of a new harvest, while about 30 million tons of grain from the last harvest remains in our warehouses. We have a colossal overstocking. And it is very important for us to sell it so that the money and the harvest do not disappear, but work for the economy, agricultural producers, he continued. Will Russia extend grain deal in May? Meanwhile, it remains unclear whether Russia will extend the grain deal after May 18, according to Tikhanov. The trend is unfavorable for us now, the food security expert underscored. That is, in fact, this deal only works for the economy of Ukraine. The extension of the deal until May 18 was a strong and unequivocal signal to our partners that if you do not solve the issues that we agreed on, then there will be no deal. As far as we can see now, despite the efforts of the UN, there is no progress on these issues. The Russian Foreign Ministry made it clear on April 19 that the West, in fact, trampled upon the original humanitarian goals of the Istanbul package agreements and showed complete disregard for the country's needs for grain and fertilizers. What really happened is that the Europeans threw all their weight into satisfying Kiev's growing commercial appetites and fulfilling their goals of filling their warehouses with cheap Ukrainian grain, Zakharova emphasized in a Wednesday statement. The presidential press secretary mentioned this, and the head of the foreign ministry said that the deal is in doubt, since it is simply not profitable for the Russian Federation in the current state of affairs, noted Tikhanov. In essence, we ensure the transit of Ukrainian grain. At the same time, we understand that the largest national corporations stand behind Ukrainian grain. That is, we, it turns out, work for the economy of other countries. Sorry, but we have our own national interests. The Kiev regime is obviously benefiting from the current situation, according to the expert. Moreover, in addition to economic issues pursued by the Ukrainian leadership, there are also military-political ones. While maintaining the grain deal and the export of grain from the three main Black Sea ports, Ukraine receives a security guarantee in relation to the Black Sea ports from Russia. The initiative is consuming Russia's military resources apart from providing the Kiev regime with much-needed profits. All of this plays into the hands of Ukrainian Nazism and supports their economy, concluded Tikhanov. China launches first batch of 30-year Treasury bond futures. The first batch of 30-year Treasury bond futures contracts was listed on the China Financial Futures Exchange, (FEX), on Friday, serving to improve the Chinese government's ability to raise funds for projects that are crucial for national development. These government bond futures feature low transaction costs and high liquidity, and are seen as a key tool to manage interest rate risks. The introduction of 30-year Treasury bond futures has improved the coverage of long-term government bonds in the futures market, according to Luo Sifeng, vice chairman of the China Futures Association. Luo added that investors will now have more diverse investment strategies and tools to choose from, meeting the needs of different market participants. The move is also expected to help improve asset allocation and risk management capabilities of medium and long-term institutional investors, wrote Dong Su and Chen Jianheng, analysts from the fixed income research team at the China International Capital Corporation. It also enhances the pricing efficiency of long-term government bonds, they added. The first batch of 30-year Treasury bond futures contracts available for trading includes 3 contracts dated June, September, and December 2023. The margin requirement for each contract is 3.5% of the contract value. On the first day of trading, the price limit for each contract is set within 7% of the benchmark price, according to the CFEX. The first Chinese Treasury bond futures were listed on the CFEX back in 2013. Since then, 2-year, 5-year, 10-year bond futures were introduced. Analysts say that they have become an important tool for hedging and arbitrage in the bond market, making positive contributions to the liquidity of the spot bond market and the development of a multi-layered capital market. G7's Russian export ban would hurt Japan, media. A range of businesses are expected to suffer if a new embargo is imposed. An embargo on used car deliveries to Russia would harm Japanese businesses if the G7 follows through with plans for more stringent sanctions, the Kyodo News Agency reported on Friday. While exports of luxury cars to Russia have been barred by Western restrictions, supplies of second-hand vehicles have thus far gone unsanctioned. Last year, Japanese deliveries of used cars surged to their highest level since January 2009, according to government data. But this may change as Ukraine's allies are reportedly considering a near-total embargo on exports to Russia. Officials in G7 countries are finalizing a proposal which could be put forward at the US-led group's next summit, scheduled for Japan in May. The latest plan could expand the trade embargo to used cars, tires, cosmetic items, and clothing, Kyoto reported, citing a government source. According to other media outlets, Tokyo is concerned that the proposed ban on exports of second-hand cars to Russia could trigger a domino effect, causing damage to regional Japanese economies and businesses beyond the automotive sector. A potential embargo could result in a drop in demand for Japanese vehicles, which in turn would lead to job losses through a decrease in production. The automotive industry supports many small and medium-sized businesses in Japan, such as parts suppliers, dealerships, and service centers, which could all suffer. Russian exporters may apply for zero-rated VAT if they use overseas stocks. Russian entrepreneurs selling in retail using overseas stocks, in particular online trading, will get an opportunity to apply for zero-rated VAT. The State Duma adopted the corresponding law on April 19. The Russian Export Center took part in the formation and promotion of these amendments. In accordance with the legislation, now an exporter could apply for zero-rated VAT only if he sends goods to an overseas customer with the Russian post, the REC says. The law on amendments to the tax code will take effect on January 1, 2025. The report added that among exporters there is a popular scheme of shipping goods out of Russia, storing them overseas, and then selling to a customer in retail. In particular, it is subject to exporters who sell goods on international marketplaces. In this case, it is impossible to apply for zero-rated VAT, the REC explained. With the amendments to the tax code, export incentives will become available if that is the case. This would allow an entrepreneur to make their goods more internationally competitive. An entrepreneur will need to provide tax authorities with an electronic register containing all the necessary data for tax control. Only then can they apply for zero-rated VAT. This data includes a bill of entry, which is used to export goods from Russia in accordance with customs procedures, an invoice document, shipping address of goods delivered to a customer, and a stock lease agreement. South American nation hikes interest rate to 81%. Argentina's move aims to contain inflation that soared past 100% in March. Argentina now has one of the highest policy rates in the world, after the country's central bank increased its benchmark interest rate by 300 basis points on Thursday, to 81%, according to the figures on the regulator's website. The country's monetary authority made the bold step after inflation soared past expectations in March, exceeding 104% year-on-year. The jump means the price of many consumer goods has more than doubled since the same period a year ago. Buenos Aires also posted a $1.1 billion trade deficit last month, the widest in nearly 5 years. Agricultural goods, which account for most of the country's export basket, fell 34% from a year ago as the farming industry has been hit by an unprecedented drought. Some Argentine economists predict a 4% recession in the country. Argentina's national currency, the peso, has hit record lows against the US dollar in popular parallel markets, where it's worth roughly half the official exchange rate, according to Reuters. The South American country's international reserves dropped this week to a record low for the year. Globally, Argentina has had among the highest inflation rates for several years in a row. Buenos Aires has long tried to contain inflation, but divisions have marred the nation's economic policy. Last summer, 3 economy ministers succeeded one another in the space of just 4 weeks as the economic crisis deepened. In December, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, approved another $6 billion of bailout money. It was the latest payout for Argentina in a 30-month program that is expected to reach a total of $44 billion. The highest benchmark interest rate in the world, at 150%, is in Zimbabwe. CEO, Lamborghini will take steps to balance customer preferences and pushing sustainability. At this year's Shanghai Auto Show, Italian luxury car maker Lamborghini brought its first plug-in hybrid sports car. CGTN's Wang Tianya spoke to the company's chairman and CEO, Stefan Winkelmann, about Lamborghini's electric transition plans. Russian Central Bank, use of digital ruble in Russia to be voluntary. The use of the digital ruble in Russia will be voluntary, with citizens able to personally choose between various forms of currency, Russian Central Bank Governor Elvira Nabiullina said on Thursday. The most important thing we are going to talk about is the voluntariness. The use of the digital ruble will be a personal choice. Some people, for example, don't use smartphones and are not going to use them. There will be other forms of currency available for them, to which they are accustomed, both cash and non-cash, Nabiullina told the lower chamber of the Russian parliament. The prototype platform for the digital ruble was finished in December 2021. The Central Bank of Russia is planning to use the digital ruble as an additional form of Russia's national currency. It will be possible to use the digital ruble both for offline and online payments, and it will not have any expiration date. The regulator will grant access to the digital ruble to all economic agents, including individuals, businesses, and the government. Russia's central bank is also ready to be open in its thinking on cryptocurrency transactions between Russian and foreign entities, Nabiullina highlighted. We think that the new reality calls for a limited use of cryptocurrencies in external payments. We are ready to show flexibility and allow entrepreneurs to settle external payments with foreign contractors in crypto if it solves their problems, she said in Parliament. Cryptocurrencies in Russia are not officially accepted as a form of payment, but central bank governors said on Monday that the Bank of Russia was considering allowing the use of digital coins for financial transactions with a limited pool of trusted partners. Primarily organizations with partial state ownership. German railways and airports paralyzed by strikes. The mass walkout affects national operator Deutsche Bahn and coincided with peak hours on Friday morning. Passenger trains ground to a halt across Germany on Friday morning amid a nationwide strike launched by workers' union EVG, which is demanding pay rises for railway staff. The action coincides with similar walkouts at several major German airports which started on Thursday. The warning strike on rail networks began at 3 a.m. local time and is scheduled to end at 11 a.m., meaning it covers the morning rush hours. EVG Executive Board member Cosima Ingenche argued that, by calling this time for a time-limited warning strike in the early morning hours, we send a clear signal that we do not want to affect the passengers, but rather the companies. Friday's walkout has impacted city trains as well as regional and long-distance lines. Meanwhile, a separate strike by security personnel at airports in Cologne, Düsseldorf, Hamburg, and Stuttgart is underway as workers seek pay rises. According to Germany's ADV Airport Association, the walkout has affected 45,200 passengers on Thursday alone, with that number expected to reach 100,000 by the end of Friday. While the rail strike ends at 11 a.m., Deutsche Bahn has warned it will not resume long-haul services until at least 1 p.m. on Friday. Delays and cancellations are expected throughout the day, the operator pointed out. All who can replan their journey should do this, Deutsche Bahn official Martin Seeler advised. He accused EVG of losing its sense of proportion and provoking chaos. The union is in talks with about 50 companies, including the national railway operator. It is demanding that workers' monthly pay be hiked by at least €650, $710, or 12% within 12 months. The minimum wage is also among the issues being discussed. Deutsche Bahn has so far offered a 5% increase plus a one-off payment of up to €2,500, a proposal EVG has rejected as inadequate. Another round of wage negotiations is expected next Tuesday. Inflation in Germany has risen to levels unseen since the 1990s over the past year, with the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the consequences of anti-Russian sanctions stated as among the causes. China stresses enterprises' role in innovation, reaffirms support for private sector. The first meeting of the 20th Central Commission for Deepening Overall Reform was held on Friday afternoon in Beijing. Chinese President Xi Jinping, also General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, CPC, Central Committee and Chairman of the Central Military Commission, presided over the meeting and delivered a speech. The meeting stressed the principal role of enterprises in innovation and pledged facilitation of the same. Focusing on national strategies and needs of industrial development, the meeting agreed to increase enterprise innovation support, actively encourage and effectively guide private enterprises to participate in major national innovation, and promote the role of enterprises in key core technology innovation and major original technology breakthroughs. Besides, the meeting noted that support for the development of the private sector is a consistent policy of the CPC Central Committee. It pledged to optimize the private sector's development environment, remove the institutional barriers that restrict the fair participation of private enterprises in market competition and guide private enterprises to find their right positioning in high-quality development through their own reform and development, compliance operation, transformation, and upgrading, and constantly improve the quality of development. NASA denies report about satellite falling over Kiev, says device remains in orbit. Following the reports that NASA's satellite fell in Ukraine, Rob Margetta, NASA's public affairs officer told Sputnik that the agency's satellite called RESI remains in orbit, and no other objects re-entered the atmosphere. We are tracking a NASA satellite called RESI that is expected to re-enter Earth's orbit tonight. However, that satellite remains in orbit at this time, Margetta said. NASA and the Department of Defense continue to track RESI. No other NASA satellite re-entered the atmosphere earlier today. Earlier on Wednesday, the head of the Kiev City Military Administration, Serhiy Popko, said that the flash in the sky over Kiev was the result of a NASA space satellite falling to Earth. A bright flash of unknown origin was seen in the sky late Wednesday over Kiev and the region. Local media reported explosions in the sky, and published a video of the fall of a luminous object. A few minutes after reports of UFOs, an air raid alert was declared in the region. Ukraine presidential advisor Andriy Yermak said that the mysterious flash in the sky over Kiev was the result of the work of Ukrainian air defense, but soon deleted the message. The agency, in a statement, said that NASA's retired Reuven Ramadi high-energy solar spectroscopic imager, RESI, spacecraft is predicted by the Department of Defense to re-enter Earth's atmosphere at approximately 8:50 p.m. EDT on Wednesday, April 19 with an uncertainty of plus or minus an hour. NASA expects most of the spacecraft to burn up as it travels through the atmosphere, but some components are expected to survive re-entry, the agency said. The risk of harm coming to anyone on Earth is low, approximately 1 in 2,467. NASA and DoD will continue to monitor re-entry and update predictions. NASA concluded by saying that from 2002 to its decommissioning in 2018, RESI helped NASA understand the basic physics of particle acceleration and explosive energy release in solar flares. Meta lays off tech teams, battering employee morale. Meta Platforms Inc. on Wednesday carried out another round of job cuts, this time hitting engineers and adjacent tech teams, as Chief Executive Mark Zuckerberg further moved to streamline the business in a bid to make 2023 a year of efficiency. Meta in March became the first big tech company to announce a second round of mass layoffs, which it said would take place in 3 main batches over several months and impact 10,000 employees. Wednesday's cuts, though expected, prompted expressions of frustration from Meta employees. Layoffs were the subject of the most popular questions posted on an internal company forum on Wednesday ahead of an upcoming employee town hall. You've shattered the morale and confidence in leadership of many high performers who work with intensity. Why should we stay at Meta? Read one question seen by Reuters. The question references comments Zuckerberg made last year urging employees to work with more intensity to meet the Facebook and Instagram parent company's business challenges. The company declined a Reuters request for comment. Meta's first round of layoffs in the fall hit more than 11,000 employees, or 13% of its workforce at the time, and preceded other major tech companies shedding thousands of employees after a pandemic-led boom in digital advertising and cloud computing. With the restructuring, Meta is also shelving lower priority projects and flattening layers of middle management. Investors have rewarded the company for downsizing. Meta shares have surged about 80% this year, outperforming the tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite's 16% rise in the period. The company, which will announce its first quarter results on April 26, is expected to benefit from a modest pickup in the digital advertising market and regulatory pressure on chief rival TikTok. NASA develops snake robot to search for life on Saturn's moon. Enceladus is a small moon of Saturn that is known for its geysers that shoot jets of water and other material out into space. These geysers originate from an underground ocean of liquid water that is believed to be in contact with a rocky core, making Enceladus a prime candidate for harboring life beyond Earth. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, is developing a snake-like robot that could speed up space exploration by adapting to different terrain, according to media reports. The Exobiology Extant Life Surveyor, EELS, or snake-like robot, is able to glide over difficult terrain using the rotating wheels with which it is equipped. It is designed to explore the planet's surface to assess the presence of life. NASA plans to send the robot to Enceladus, Saturn's sixth largest moon, where liquid water and the chemical elements needed in organic molecules, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and sulfur, have been found.